Injured duckling saved by child. What happens next is truly heartwarming. How will this story unfold? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. Ben loved the lake. He had spent countless afternoons exploring its banks, skipping stones across its glassy surface, and watching the gentle ripples fade into nothingness. It was his favorite place in the world, a quiet retreat where he could escape into the wonders of nature. On this particular afternoon, the sun was warm, and a soft breeze rustled through the reeds. The air smelled of earth and fresh water, a scent that always made Ben feel at home. He walked along the edge of the lake, occasionally stopping to toss a pebble or crouch down to inspect tiny fish darting beneath the surface. That was when he saw it, a small, trembling creature barely visible among the reeds. At first, he thought it was just another bird resting near the water, but something about the way it moved, or rather struggled to move, made him pause. Cautiously, he stepped closer, peering through the tall grass. His breath caught in his throat. It was a tiny duckling, its yellow and black feathers damp and matted. One of its wings was bent awkwardly, and its tiny webbed feet flailed uselessly against the mud. Ben's heart squeezed. Where was its mother? Its siblings? He scanned the lake, searching for a mother duck nearby, but the water was calm, occupied only by a few distant ducks paddling leisurely along the surface. The duckling let out a small, desperate peep, struggling to move, but it barely managed a few inches before collapsing again. Ben hesitated. He had learned in school that wild animals should be left alone whenever possible. He knew that sometimes mother ducks left their ducklings for a little while, only to return later. But something about this duckling told him it was different. If its mother was coming back, she should have been here by now. And if he left it here, injured and alone, it wouldn't survive the night. Ben knelt down, careful not to startle the tiny creature. He reached into his backpack, pulling out the soft sweater he had stuffed inside earlier when the sun had warmed the air. "Hey, little guy," he murmured softly, carefully wrapping the duckling in the sweater's folds. The duckling let out another weak chirp, but didn't resist as Ben scooped it up. As he cradled the tiny creature in his hands, a realization settled over him. He had just made a decision that would change both of their lives. Ben walked home carefully, holding the tiny bundle in his hands, afraid that even the slightest jostle might cause the fragile duckling more distress. The warmth of his sweater cradled the little creature, and he could feel the faint rise and fall of its tiny chest against his palms. His mind raced. He had never cared for an animal before. Not like this. Sure, he had seen stray cats and fed birds at the park, but this was different. This duckling needed him, and he had no idea what to do next. By the time he reached his front porch, his heart was pounding. He nudged the door open with his foot and stepped inside. "Mom! Dad!" he called. His mother appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Ben, what's—" She stopped when she saw what he was holding. "Oh my goodness!" Ben's father walked in from the living room, furrowing his brow. "Is that a duck?" Ben nodded quickly. "I found him by the lake. He's hurt. I couldn't just leave him there." His mother approached, leaning down to get a closer look. The duckling let out a soft peep, blinking up at her with tiny, round eyes. She exhaled, shaking her head. "Ben, honey, we can't just take in wild animals. The best thing we can do is—" "Please," Ben interrupted, tightening his grip protectively. "He won't survive out there. He was all alone and he can't even walk properly. Just let me help him. Just for a little while." His father exchanged a glance with his mother. "Ben," his father started, but then he saw the sheer determination in his son's eyes and sighed. "Okay, but only if we do this the right way. That means researching how to take care of him and maybe calling a wildlife rescue if needed." Ben nodded vigorously. "I promise. I'll do everything. I'll take care of him." His mother sighed, but she couldn't help smiling a little. "Well, if we're going to take care of him, he needs a name." Ben looked down at the tiny creature, its feathers ruffled but its eyes still bright with life. "Lucky," he said. "Because he's lucky I found him." Lucky let out a small chirp, almost as if in agreement. Over the next hour, Ben rushed to gather everything he thought a duckling might need. He set up a makeshift nest using a shoebox lined with soft towels and placed it in a warm corner of the house, away from noise and drafts. He searched online for information on caring for an injured duckling, learning that it would need warmth, proper hydration, and a temporary diet until they figured out what was best. With his parents' help, he mixed a small dish of warm water and soft grains, carefully placing it near Lucky's tiny beak. At first, the duckling was hesitant, weak from exhaustion. But after a few gentle nudges, he finally took a sip, then another. Ben beamed. "That's it, buddy. You're gonna be okay." That night, Ben could hardly sleep. He had placed Lucky's box beside his bed, checking on him every few minutes to make sure he was still breathing, still warm, still safe. He didn't know why, but he felt a strange, deep connection to this little creature. Maybe it was because Lucky had needed him in that moment by the lake. Maybe it was because, for the first time in his life, Ben felt like he was truly making a difference. Or maybe it was something even more simple than that. Lucky wasn't just his responsibility now. He was his friend. The days passed, and Lucky slowly began to improve. His wing, though still tender, wasn't as weak anymore. He began waddling around more confidently, following Ben as he moved around the house. Wherever Ben went, Lucky was right behind him. His mother chuckled one morning as she watched them. "You've got yourself a shadow." Ben grinned. "He just likes being around me." Lucky's attachment only grew stronger. He would peep loudly whenever Ben left the room, flapping his tiny wings in protest. At first, it was endearing, but as the days stretched into a week, Ben's parents grew concerned. "He's getting better," his father said over breakfast one morning. "But Ben, have you thought about what happens next?" Ben hesitated, staring at his plate. "What do you mean?" His mother sighed gently. "Sweetheart, Lucky is a wild animal. He was never meant to live inside a house. He's getting stronger, which means soon he'll be ready to go back to the wild." The thought hit Ben like a punch to the gut. Letting Lucky go? But he had just gotten him. He looked over at the duckling, who was happily splashing in a shallow dish of water. Lucky wasn't just some animal to him anymore. He was his best friend. "I don't think he's ready yet," Ben said quickly. "He still needs me," his father sighed. "I know it's hard, but keeping him here forever wouldn't be fair to him. He needs to be with other ducks." Ben felt his chest tighten. But what if something happens to him? What if he gets lost or can't find food? Or, "Ben," his mother said softly, "the best way to take care of him is to give him the chance to live the life he was meant to live." Ben didn't respond. That night, as he lay in bed, Lucky nestled beside him in his shoebox. He stared at the ceiling, thinking. His parents were right, but that didn't make it any easier. He turned his head to the side, watching as Lucky let out a soft, sleepy chirp. "Are you ready to go home, buddy?" he whispered. Lucky didn't answer, but in his heart, Ben already knew. The time was coming, and when it did, he would have to make the hardest choice of his life. The morning air was crisp as Ben stepped outside with Lucky nestled in his hands. The familiar scent of the lake filled his lungs. But today, it felt different. The weight of what he was about to do pressed down on his chest like a heavy stone. Lucky chirped softly, shifting slightly in Ben's hands. He had grown in the weeks since they had first met, his feathers now fuller, his legs stronger. There was no denying it anymore. He wasn't the fragile, injured duckling Ben had scooped from the mud that day. He was ready. Ben, on the other hand, wasn't. His parents walked a few steps behind him, giving him space. They had made it clear that this had to be his decision, but they also knew it was inevitable. Ben swallowed hard as they reached the shore. The water shimmered under the mid-morning sun, reflecting the deep blue of the sky. A gentle breeze rustled the reeds along the edge, and in the distance, a small group of ducks floated peacefully, gliding across the surface. Lucky let out a louder chirp, as if recognizing the place. Ben hesitated. "Are you sure you want to do this today?" his mother asked gently. Ben looked down at Lucky, who tilted his head, watching him with bright, trusting eyes. He had spent weeks nursing this duckling back to health, feeding him, keeping him warm, making sure he felt safe. How was he supposed to just let him go? But deep down, he knew. Lucky deserved more than a backyard and a shoebox. He deserved freedom. Ben took a deep breath and knelt down by the water's edge. He carefully unwrapped Lucky from the soft cloth he had brought, feeling the warmth of the duckling's body against his fingers one last time. "This is your home," Ben whispered. "This is where you belong." He lowered Lucky onto the soft, damp earth near the shoreline. The duckling hesitated, glancing back at Ben as if waiting for permission. Ben forced a smile. "Go on, buddy." Lucky took a few tentative steps toward the water, then stopped. He turned his tiny head, looking at Ben again, as if unsure. Ben felt his throat tighten. "You can do it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, it seemed like Lucky wouldn't go, that maybe, just maybe, he would choose to stay. But then, with a determined little waddle, Lucky stepped into the water. Ben held his breath. The duckling paddled clumsily at first, the gentle waves rocking him slightly. But then, his movements grew smoother, more natural. He floated, then glided, then swam. Ben's heart ached with pride and sadness all at once. Lucky swam out a little farther, then turned back toward the shore, looking right at Ben. A silent moment passed between them. Then, as if giving a final farewell, Lucky let out a small, high-pitched quack before turning and swimming away. Ben blinked rapidly, trying to push back the stinging in his eyes. His mother placed a hand on his shoulder. His father gave him a reassuring nod. "You did the right thing," his father said softly. Ben knew he was right, but that didn't make it any easier. That night, as he lay in bed, his room felt emptier. No soft chirping from the shoebox beside him. No tiny webbed feet padding across his floor. Just silence. He turned onto his side, facing the window. The moon cast a pale glow across his room, and for the first time in weeks, he felt alone. He had done what was best for Lucky, but it didn't change the fact that he missed him. The next few days were strange. Ben still went down to the lake, but it wasn't the same without Lucky waddling by his side. He sat at the edge of the water, skimming pebbles across the surface, hoping, wishing that maybe, just maybe, Lucky would come back. But each time, the lake remained still and empty. Ben's heart sank further with every visit. Had Lucky forgotten him? Had he moved on? On the 5th day, Ben was about to leave when he heard something. A familiar chirp. His heart leapt. He turned toward the water, scanning the surface desperately. And then he saw him, Lucky, and he wasn't alone. A small group of ducks paddled alongside him, gliding toward the shore. Ben's breath caught as Lucky swam ahead of them, heading straight for him. He dropped to his knees just as the duck reached the shoreline. "Lucky," he whispered. The duck let out a happy little quack, hopping up onto the damp earth. Ben laughed in disbelief. "You came back." Lucky waddled right up to him, bumping his tiny head against Ben's hand. Ben's heart swelled. Lucky hadn't forgotten him. Not even a little. For the next few minutes, Ben sat by the water, watching as the other ducks floated nearby. They didn't seem afraid of him, not the way most wild ducks were. It was as if Lucky had told them that Ben was safe. His father had been right all along. Letting Lucky go hadn't been the end of their story. It had been a new beginning. And as Ben sat there, feeling the warmth of the sun on his skin and the gentle nudge of Lucky against his palm, he realized something else. He hadn't just saved Lucky's life that day at the lake. Lucky had changed his life too. Ben returned to the lake every day after that, always hoping to see Lucky again. And each time, his heart swelled with joy when the little duck appeared, swimming ahead of the others, always recognizing him. It became their routine. Ben would sit by the shore, Lucky would waddle up to him, and they would spend time together, just like they had in the backyard. But now something had changed. Lucky wasn't alone anymore. The small flock he had joined seemed to accept Ben in a way that most wild ducks wouldn't. At first, they kept their distance, hesitant but curious. Over time, however, They began to trust him, swimming closer, letting him sit near them without fear. Ben had never felt so connected to nature before. One afternoon, he arrived at the lake with a small bag of seeds and grains. He sat down by the water, scattering a few in front of him. Lucky wasted no time waddling up to him, pecking happily at the food. To Ben's surprise, 2 other ducks followed, hesitating for only a moment before joining in. Ben grinned. "Looks like you made some friends," he murmured to Lucky, watching as the other ducks gradually warmed up to him. His bond with Lucky had somehow extended to the entire flock, and people were starting to notice. One morning, as Ben sat by the water, gently feeding the ducks, he heard a voice behind him. "Excuse me, young man?" Ben turned to see an older gentleman standing near the path. He wore a baseball cap and carried a small camera around his neck. "I've been coming to this lake for years," the man said, stepping closer. "I've never seen wild ducks act this way with a human before. They trust you." Ben smiled, glancing at Lucky, who was now grooming his feathers beside him. "I guess they do." The man chuckled. "That's something special, son. Not everyone has that kind of connection with animals." Ben hadn't really thought about it before. He had been so focused on Lucky, on his recovery, on letting him go, on hoping he would come back, that he hadn't realized just how rare this bond was. The man snapped a quick picture of the scene, nodding in approval. "Keep doing what you're doing, kid. The world needs more people like you." That night at dinner, Ben told his parents about the encounter. His father smiled proudly. "You've always had a good heart, Ben. But this is more than just a kind act. You're making a real impact." His mother nodded. "Maybe you should share your story. Let others see what kindness can do." Ben thought about it. He had never been the type to seek attention, but if his experience with Lucky could inspire others to care more about animals, maybe it was worth it. A few days later, he got the opportunity. At school, his teacher announced that the class would be doing personal storytelling projects. Each student had to share an experience that had impacted them deeply. Ben knew exactly what he was going to talk about. When the day came, he stood at the front of the class, a mix of nerves and excitement bubbling inside him. He took a deep breath and began. "A few weeks ago, I found an injured duckling by the lake." He told them everything. How he had hesitated at first, unsure if he should intervene. How he had taken Lucky home, nursed him back to health, and built an unbreakable bond with him. How letting him go had been one of the hardest things he had ever done. "But he came back," Ben said, his voice steady. "And he wasn't alone." He glanced at his classmates, seeing the way they leaned forward, completely engaged. "Helping Lucky made me realize that kindness doesn't just change one life. It ripples out. It grows. Because when you show compassion, it doesn't stop with you. Spreads." When he finished, the classroom was silent for a moment. Then applause. His teacher smiled. "That was a beautiful story, Ben. Thank you for sharing it." After class, a few classmates came up to him. "I never thought about helping animals like that before," one of them admitted. "But your story kind of makes me want to." "Yeah," another chimed in. "Maybe we should start volunteering somewhere or something." Ben felt a warmth spread in his chest. Maybe his mother had been right. Maybe sharing his story really could make a difference. A few days later, his teacher asked if she could submit his story to a local newspaper that ran features on community heroes. Ben hesitated at first, but then he thought about Lucky, about what it meant to help, to give something your heart and expect nothing in return. And he agreed. When the article was published, it spread faster than he ever expected. People in the community started recognizing him, some stopping him at the grocery store or the park to tell him how much they loved his story. The local wildlife rescue center reached out, inviting him to visit their facility and even offering him a chance to volunteer. Ben couldn't believe it. All of this just because he had stopped to help one tiny duckling. But maybe that was the point. Kindness wasn't about grand gestures or huge, life-changing moments. Sometimes it was just about doing the right thing, one small choice at a time. And those choices, they mattered. They rippled outward, and they changed the world. Ben's story continued to spread throughout the community. The newspaper article had caught the attention of more than just a few kind strangers. Local organizations began reaching out, wanting to hear more about his experience with Lucky. One afternoon, his teacher handed him a letter that had been sent to the school. "It's from the Community Nature Center," she said, smiling. "I think you'll want to read it." Ben unfolded the letter carefully. "Dear Ben, we were so inspired by your story about Lucky the duckling. Your kindness and dedication to helping an animal in need touched our hearts. We'd love for you to come visit our center and learn more about how we care for injured wildlife. If you're interested, we'd even love to have you volunteer with us. We believe you have a natural gift for connecting with animals, and we'd be honored to have you on our team. Looking forward to hearing from you. The Riverbend Wildlife Center." Ben read the letter twice, his heart pounding with excitement. A wildlife center? A real wildlife center wanted him to come visit, and maybe even volunteer? His mind raced. He had never even considered the idea of working with animals before, but now it felt like this was meant to be. That night at dinner, he showed the letter to his parents. His mother smiled. "That's an amazing opportunity, Ben." His father nodded. "Sounds like they see something special in you." Ben bit his lip. "Do you think I should do it?" His parents exchanged glances before his father replied, "I think the real question is, do you want to do it?" Ben didn't hesitate. "Yeah, I do." The very next day, he wrote back to the Wildlife Center, thanking them for their invitation and letting them know he would love to visit. A week later, he found himself standing in front of the Riverbend Wildlife Center, excitement and nerves buzzing inside him. The center was nestled in a quiet area near the edge of town, surrounded by lush greenery and the sounds of birds chirping. A friendly-looking woman greeted him at the entrance. "You must be Ben," she said warmly. "I'm Lisa, the lead caretaker here. We've been looking forward to meeting you." Ben shook her hand, feeling a mixture of pride and nervousness. "Thank you for having me." Lisa led him through the facility, showing him the various enclosures where injured animals were being cared for. There were baby squirrels in a warm nesting box, a fox with a bandaged leg, and even a group of turtles recovering from injuries. Ben was in awe. "This is incredible," he said. "You help all of these animals?" Lisa nodded. "Every single one. Some we rehabilitate and release back into the wild. Others, if they can't survive on their own, stay here as part of our educational programs." Ben's heart swelled. "That's amazing." As they walked, Lisa stopped in front of a small enclosure filled with ducks. "Speaking of amazing," she said, "there's someone here who wants to say hello." Ben's eyes widened as Lucky waddled toward him from inside the enclosure. "No way." Ben breathed, a grin spreading across his face. Lucky flapped his wings excitedly, recognizing Ben instantly. Lisa chuckled. "Your story inspired some people to pay closer attention to the local duck population. A few days ago, a concerned neighbor noticed Lucky and his group near a busy road. They called us, and we brought them in to check on them before releasing them somewhere safer." Ben knelt down, extending a hand. Lucky immediately pressed his little beak against Ben's palm. "You're still causing trouble, huh?" Ben whispered, laughing. Lisa smiled. "We were planning to release them tomorrow at a safer location. If you'd like, you can be the one to set Lucky free again." Ben didn't even have to think about it. "I'd love that." The next morning, Ben arrived early at the Wildlife Center, excited but emotional. This time, when he let Lucky go, it wouldn't just be near the lake. It would be somewhere safe, somewhere that the wildlife experts had deemed perfect for him and his new family. Lisa handed Ben a small, portable crate where Lucky was gently nestled. "You've done something really special, Ben," she said. "Most people walk by animals in need without giving them a second thought. But you stopped. You cared. And because of that, Lucky has a real chance at life." Ben nodded, swallowing hard. He hadn't done any of this expecting recognition. He had just done what felt right. He carried the crate toward the pond that stretched beyond the Wildlife Center's land. It was beautiful, quiet, filled with reeds and gentle ripples across the water. He knelt down, opening the crate. Lucky stepped out cautiously, looking around. Ben felt a familiar ache in his chest. This was really it. "You're free now, buddy," he said softly. "Go on." Lucky hesitated, turning to look at Ben one last time. Then, with a happy little quack, He waddled forward and slipped into the water. Ben watched as Lucky paddled out, joining the rest of the ducks, becoming a part of the wild where he truly belonged. Tears stung his eyes, but this time, they weren't from sadness. They were from pride. As Ben stood up, Lisa patted his shoulder. "You should be proud of yourself, Ben. And if you ever want to help more animals, our doors are always open." Ben took one last look at Lucky, who was now thriving in his new home. Then he turned to Lisa and smiled. "I'd love that." That day, Ben didn't just say goodbye to Lucky. He discovered his future. Because kindness wasn't something you did once. It was something you chose again and again. And he knew, deep in his heart, that he would never stop choosing it. Ben returned to the Wildlife Center the following week, but this time, it wasn't to say goodbye to Lucky. It was to begin his journey as a volunteer. Lisa had extended an invitation for him to help out, and after everything he had experienced, he couldn't imagine saying no. The first day of volunteering felt surreal. Instead of being just a visitor, Ben was now part of something bigger. He was given a tour of the behind-the-scenes operations of the Wildlife Center, seeing firsthand the effort that went into rescuing, treating, and rehabilitating animals. Lisa handed him a clipboard with the list of tasks for the day. "You won't be handling injured animals right away," she explained, "but there's plenty to do. Cleaning enclosures, preparing food, learning how to monitor behaviors. It all matters." Ben took the clipboard eagerly. "I'm ready." His first task was preparing meals for some of the center's temporary residents. He learned about the different diets for injured birds, squirrels, and even a recovering fox. Every species had unique needs, and understanding them was a big part of the process. As he chopped fruits and vegetables for the animals' meals, he listened to the caretakers share stories about past rescues. "Last year, we had a swan that was tangled in fishing wire," one of the volunteers, Jake, said. "It took weeks to get him back to full strength. But when he was released, he didn't just fly off. He stayed nearby for a few days, as if he knew what we had done for him." Ben smiled, thinking of Lucky. Lisa walked in with a clipboard. "Ben, want to help with something special?" Ben wiped his hands on his apron. Of course, Lisa led him outside to one of the rehabilitation enclosures. "This little guy was brought in a few days ago," she said, gesturing to a tiny rabbit nestled in a soft blanket. "He was found alone, dehydrated, probably abandoned. He's doing much better now, but he still needs some care." Ben's heart melted. The rabbit twitched its nose, staring up at him with soft brown eyes. "You can help with feeding," Lisa said, handing him a small bottle. "Just be gentle." Ben took the bottle carefully, kneeling beside the rabbit. As he held it up, the tiny creature eagerly latched on, drinking the formula. A warmth spread through Ben's chest. This was what he wanted to do. This was his purpose. As the weeks passed, Ben became an essential part of the Wildlife Center's volunteer team. He worked with new rescues, helped with community outreach programs, and even assisted in rehabilitating more injured ducks, always reminded of the moment he had found Lucky. His connection to nature had deepened in a way he never imagined. But nothing could have prepared him for what happened one special afternoon. Ben was outside, helping clean an enclosure, when Lisa called him over. "You're going to want to see this," she said, smiling. Ben wiped his hands and followed her to the observation area overlooking the large release pond. At first, he didn't notice anything unusual. The water rippled peacefully, ducks floating along the surface. Then he saw him. His breath caught. It was Lucky. But this time, he wasn't just another duck in the pond. He was leading a small group of younger ducks, guiding them across the water. Ben's chest tightened with emotion. "Looks like he's a leader now," Lisa said, watching with admiration. Ben swallowed hard. "Yeah, he is." He stood there for a long time, watching as Lucky flapped his wings, gently nudging the younger ducks forward, teaching them just as Ben had once helped him. A full circle moment. Lucky had gone from the fragile, injured duckling that Ben had rescued to a protector, a guide, a leader in his own right. And as Ben stood by the water, he realized something. He wasn't just watching Lucky's transformation. He was seeing his own. He had saved Lucky, and in return, Lucky had changed his life forever. A few weeks later, Ben was asked to speak at a school assembly about his experience. At first, he hesitated. Public speaking wasn't something he was particularly excited about. But then he thought about what his mother had told him months ago. His story mattered, could inspire others. And if even one more person chose kindness because of it, then it would be worth it. The auditorium was packed the day he stepped onto the stage. Hundreds of students sat in rows, their eyes on him. Ben took a deep breath, gripping the microphone. "I used to think that one person couldn't make much of a difference," he began. That small actions didn't really matter in the big picture. He glanced at the crowd, his confidence growing. "But then, I met Lucky." He told them everything. From finding the injured duckling by the lake to nursing him back to health. From the pain of letting him go to the joy of seeing him thrive. And how that one small act of kindness had led him to the wildlife center, to a new purpose, to a future he never imagined. When he finished, the auditorium was silent for a moment. Then thunderous applause. Teachers, students, even some parents in the crowd stood up, clapping. Ben felt a lump rise in his throat, not because of the applause, but because he realized that his story had reached them, that maybe, just maybe, he had sparked something in someone else. As he stepped off the stage, a younger boy approached him, eyes wide with excitement. "Hey," the boy said, hesitating. I just wanted to say your story was really cool. I always see animals outside, but I never thought I could actually help them." Ben smiled. "You can. You always can." The boy nodded, grinning. "I think I want to volunteer too." And just like that, Ben's act of kindness continued to ripple outward. Because kindness wasn't just about one duck. It wasn't just about one moment. It was about changing the world one choice at a time. And as Ben walked out of the auditorium, he knew this was only the beginning. Ben's journey didn't end with Lucky. In fact, it felt like it had only just begun. After his speech at school, things changed. Students started approaching him in the hallways, asking about volunteering, about animals, about the power of small kindnesses. Teachers invited him to share his story with younger classes, and even the local news station reached out, wanting to do a feature on his experience with Lucky and the Wildlife Center. At first, Ben felt overwhelmed. He hadn't set out to become a spokesperson for kindness. He had just wanted to help one little duck. But now he saw it for what it was, an opportunity. An opportunity to inspire others the same way Lucky had inspired him. So, when the Wildlife Center asked if he would be interested in helping with a community education program, teaching younger kids about how to care for animals, Ben said yes without hesitation. His first day leading a workshop felt surreal. A dozen wide-eyed kids sat in a circle, eager to listen as Ben stood beside Lisa and a small rehabilitated bird that had recently been rescued. "Not every animal we find needs our help," Ben explained, echoing what he had learned during his time at the center. "But when they do, it's up to us to be responsible. That means learning how to help the right way." The kids nodded intently, absorbing every word. Lisa smiled as she handed Ben a small clipboard. "Why don't you show them how we monitor an animal's recovery?" Ben beamed. Teaching others felt natural, fulfilling. It was like everything had fallen into place. As months passed, Ben became more involved in wildlife conservation, even attending events where experts spoke about environmental protection and ethical animal care. He started a social media page documenting his experiences at the center, sharing stories about rescues and lessons learned. The page grew faster than he expected. People from different parts of the country started following, sending messages about how they had been inspired to help an injured animal or how they had learned something new from his posts. One message stood out. It was from a girl named Maya, who lived states away. She wrote, "I used to think I couldn't make a difference, but after reading your story about Lucky, I decided to volunteer at my local shelter. Yesterday, I helped rescue my first injured bird. Thank you for showing me that small actions matter." Ben stared at the message for a long time, his heart swelling with emotion. What had started as one small moment at the lake had turned into something so much bigger. It had become a movement, and the best part? It all happened because he had stopped, noticed, and chosen to help. One afternoon, While cleaning enclosures at the center, Lisa walked over with a proud smile. "You've done more than just volunteer here, Ben," she said. "You've inspired people. We'd love for you to officially join the team. Not just as a volunteer, but as a youth ambassador." Ben's eyes widened. "A youth ambassador?" Lisa nodded. "You'd represent the center at events, help train new volunteers, and keep spreading the message of conservation and kindness. You've already been doing the work. We just want to make it official." Ben felt a lump in his throat. He had started this journey with no idea where it would lead. Now, he was being trusted with something bigger than himself. He thought about Lucky, how that one little duckling had changed everything, and he smiled. "I'd love that." That night, as he walked home from the lake, his favorite place in the world, he thought about all the paths that life could take. He had always thought the lake was just a quiet retreat. But now, he knew it had been the start of something greater. Because kindness had a way of rippling outward. And as he stood by the shore, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning.